Yeah, and Viridor demonstrates you can deliver to your shareholders and to the planet simultaneously. Now, I introduce Felix as the best connected man in the room. You're right at the center of various stakeholder dialogues. Give us your perspective and response, Felix.
It's interesting. I can't resist but to comment on your contrast there. I mean, you could contrast it with the banking industry, which had a lack of regulation. And I think, we have to be very, very careful about this. I mean, we saw with the banks where they privatized the profits and socialized the losses, and we're all suffering from the impacts of a lack of regulation, a lack of bureaucracy. So let us not forget that as we move to deal with the environment. And I think it's very encouraging that Aviva and HSBC and others are calling for a convention on corporate sustainability at the UN, and it is part of the discourse for Rio+20. I think that the policy briefs that were produced by the scientists, I think, were excellent. And they were perhaps the only stakeholder group that really ensured that the input to the regional process and to the Global Sustainability Panel was done in a coherent way. And I really do admire and support the work that was done. I think that the declaration, we saw some very important indicators of where the science community thinks we should go. And the support for Sustainable Development Goals, I think, is critical. I think we recognize that perhaps the lack of implementation of Agenda 21 and the Johannesburg Plan of Implementation maybe would have been helped if we'd have approached it from a goal-based, then supported by sets of indicators. And I think the science community has a huge role to play once those goals are set in helping to choose the right indicator baskets for each of those goals. And if you take the suggestions from the governments of Colombia, Guatemala and Peru that we would like to see those goals agreed by Rio and that the indicators would be agreed within the next year after Rio, then there's a lot of work to be done, and I think that's very important. We need an institution at the top of the UN which can integrate sustainable development, and the institution we had, the Commission on Sustainable Development, had some great first years, but clearly has run into the sand, and the suggestion of a Sustainable Development Council, I think, is a critical one, similar to the Human Rights Council at the center of the UN process. And the idea in the panel report of a Sustainable Development Outlook report, which the Secretary General just mentioned, and which to some extent builds on the excellent UNEP GEO report, which is one I think the best reports produced in the UN system, would be important. But it would need a kind of intergovernmental panel on sustainable development to help bring in Future Earth, the IPCC, the IPBES, and maybe this Future Oceans panel. Otherwise, the danger is that there will be fragmentation in the science in the UN system, and I think that would be a real danger. I think the issue around planetary boundaries, which Johan has put on the table, I think is absolutely important. But it needs to be underpinned by social foundation. And I think if anyone hasn't yet read the paper by Oxfam on the donut, it's well worth having a look at. And they've drawn very much a social foundation by which countries should work for. And maybe it isn't moving people out of poverty that we're looking for, but we're looking for a world that can have 9 billion middle-class people. Shouldn't all of us be able to live in a particular way that's not just out of poverty, but is actually at a level which we would like to see? So I think the challenge is not only that Future Earth has brought together I think an important platform, and that it needs to deliver in 10 years, it needs to deliver now. So there's a short-term issue. For Rio, there's a medium-term issue in ensuring that people understand the urgency, because it is time for change. We can't wait another 20 years. Rio set us a very good blueprint in 1992. The problem has been a lack of delivery. And, to some extent, I sit here as an embarrassed British citizen, where my Prime Minister has yet to announce that he's going to go to Rio.
Well, Felix, there's 2 months to go, so there's all to play for yet. Let me put some questions to you, because they're coming in thick and fast. And we've had so many ideas that you've come up with, new institutions,